What is the most surprising story of someone you thought you knew well? Part 5. I discovered that my maternal grandparents were friends with an infamous Filipino criminal/vigilante from their town known as Nardong Putik and used to hire him to protect their cattle from their rivals. The assistant manager at Chateau Halifax, whom I worked closely with, had been in charge of food service for Fidel Castro's army in Cuba. Fidel wanted Jose dead because the food was too American style, but Jose escaped. He could never go back to his country and be safe. He was a great man, fun, and a joy. Jose Castaneras. My mother grew up on the grounds of what was then called a mental asylum, with over 500 patients. This was in Ontario. Her father was the chief psychiatrist. He warned her not to marry my father, whom he said was a sociopath. She was rebellious, bipolar with mania, and eloped with my father. Her father refused to have contact with her. Mom used to get so angry when I was a kid and asked her about her childhood. I didn't know her family and learned this later in my life. My mom was a superstar with 5 terrible kids and a wandering husband. My grandmother is the simplest woman I've ever known. I know she's rich and almost monopolized the rice business in my home country, but I don't know what other businesses she had. But I remember her always flying to Macau for a business meeting. When she passed away, my mom found out she owned 2 mountain lands and more lands that she almost owned an entire province. I learned she had casinos in Macau and some, as well as textile factories, and more. I wouldn't be surprised if she also had some business in the black market. I don't know what my mom did with her empire. There was a girl I met in one of my early college classes whom I quickly fell in love with. She was funny and polite, and we got along well. Also in this class was someone who was difficult to get along with. He was pompous and loud, but also charming, and he became quite a popular figure in my department. To my dismay back then, they started dating for the 2nd semester, and they stayed together. Even before they had any idea they liked each other. Something about him didn't sit well with me. I could never understand why I always felt uncomfortable being around him. Time passed, and I forgot about both of them. At some point, they got married and started their own business. One morning, he had sneaked into her office without her knowing. He shot and killed her, then took his own life. Their employees found their bodies quite quickly. When I heard the news, I couldn't believe it. I had a great uncle who was basically the best person I knew. He was 20 years younger than my grandfather, the youngest of a family of 13, but he took care of everyone. He did anything my grandparents, among others, needed. He married a woman 10 years older than him, who had already finished having children, and not only finished raising them but also raised a granddaughter in their home. He was so kind, hardworking, and not as stingy as many people I knew. I have never heard anyone say anything bad about him that wasn't based on his character and not on some strange elitism. Anyway, one day my brother made a comment about this great uncle in the past being in prison, but he didn't know why. I asked my grandfather and found out he had killed someone while driving drunk and had had DUI before that. I was shocked. After a lifetime of knowing this uncle, I couldn't imagine him being so irresponsible and insensitive. It also broke my heart because I knew he must have regretted it a lot, rightly so. With his personality, I can't imagine he wasn't tormented by guilt. However, I never talked to him about it. He was dying of cancer by the time I heard the story. One thing it did make clear to me is that people can be truly complex and change over time. Driving drunk is disgusting precisely because it can kill someone. Nothing he did can erase that mistake. However, that mistake also can't erase all the good he did for others in general. Certainly, he never did anything so careless again. I met Brenda in a knitting group for women over 40. She said she was a freelance accountant with regular clients. We became good friends. About 2 years later, I had been fired. We went on a road trip with another woman to an alpaca farm to buy alpaca wool and admire the alpaca cryas. The topic of starting my own business came up, and I said I didn't believe I had the ability to be an entrepreneur. That led Brenda to tell us what she really did for a living. She was a phone sex operator. At one point, she was a production accountant but wanted to be her own boss. So she partnered with another accountant and they created a phone sex service. They hired operators and also did some of the work themselves. My hippie knitter friend has a dominatrix personality for a particular niche. She does a lot of knitting while chatting with her clients. She wasn't lying about having regular clients. In the years since, she has really taken on some accounting contracts for stability. She puts on the headset when she wants to earn some extra money, like to buy more wool. A sweet and short Burmese guy. He worked in the heat treatment ovens when I was a production engineer. He would help anyone, super polite, and just an amazing person overall. As far as I know, He had left his home to have a better life for his daughter, who now has an incredibly high rank in the Air Force. He would extensively talk about his life in the village, how they built homes for the new couples, etc. Someone took him by surprise one day, and the guy turned around and almost stabbed him. The surprise had triggered deeply ingrained defensive tactics. The guy was a former Gurkha, still carrying his knife with him all the time. You would never have known he was capable of such fierceness. He was affectionate, and we had a sincere chat before he left the company. Genuinely someone I'm proud to know, but boy, he moved fast. After over 10 years of friendship, I found out that a friend and I were both almost victims of the same serial killer when we were kids. In both circumstances, our parents appeared surprising the killer, who then fled. I guess people will ask who the killer is or was, so Henry Lee Lucas. I made a friend in college who was older than me and most of my classmates. I was 18 and he was in his late 20s. Smart guy, well-read, funny, charming. He was a loving single father. I found out he had decided to go back to college after gaining custody of his daughter. He had spent 5 years in prison in Japan after being caught during a layover while trafficking heroin from Thailand to Canada. While in prison, his wife fell deeply into addiction. After being released, he had to return to Thailand to find his young daughter and bring her to Canada. I can't remember what happened to his wife. She wasn't in the picture when I met him. A wild guy, an amazing and talented daughter who had such a tremendous upbringing. A sweet little old lady, she was our office librarian at work always. I thought she grew up in this small American town and never left. One day I started chatting with her, and she began to reminisce about the time when she was too skinny, pregnant, and trying to find something she could eat at a market in Iran, where she lived with her first husband. It wasn't what I expected.
My ex-husband turned out to be a convicted pedophile. He hid it from me for 2 years. He also cheated on me while we were together. We got divorced and all that. Turns out it was with a guy. And now she's dating men. So, I married a gay pedophile.
An older man he used to work with told me that he had been shot several times in gang fights and that his brother was the leader of a large motorcycle gang. He said they were rich and bribed the police for life and they could literally murder me and get away with it. He wasn't a threat, just an example. He offered me to meet his brother as proof, but I declined because I thought he was crazy. I saw some of the gunshot wounds, and later a credible person told me that his brother was the leader of said motorcycle gang, so I can believe that. I don't know about the rest of the stories he told me, and I'm skeptical, but I like to believe they are true. My mom and dad, both were very heavy substance users. I found an old photo of my dad in Alaska tending to his marijuana plants, and they explained that they basically did everything that was available in the 70s to try. Inhalants, injectables, inhalants, toads, plants, and more. Haha. They found Jesus right when my older brother was born, and they always taught us that substances were bad. Dad became an engineer at a large defense contractor and mom was a teacher. We still talk now that I'm older and they tell me crazy stories. Wild. I met a guy, super calm and cool. One time when we were on FaceTime, he told me how he grew up with this girl who was a couple years older than him. Well, it turns out that girl manipulated him into smoking and vaping. He was constantly being pressured and still vapes to this day. She also used to take him to his drug dealer. He was 12 and she was 16 when this happened. Well, they ended up losing contact because she started getting addicted to pills and her parents found out about her, which resulted in her moving away. I had a classmate in high school who didn't want her back touched. I hated her for that. If you want to call her, you should call her by her name and not touch her to get her attention. Before graduating, she told us that she was almost raped by a stranger. That stranger tapped her on the back to get her attention, and when she turned away from her, he kidnapped her and almost raped her in an open field. Thank God someone saw the incident while it was happening and the stranger ran away. Pretty f***ed up backstory. Since then I never judge a person's peculiarities. Years ago, my neighbor in Oregon was a sweet, funny older man with Hawaiian heritage. One day he mentioned that he used to have a studio and take photos of memorable days for an entire generation. So I asked him what else he used to photograph and he invited us to his house, and on one wall he had autographed photos of all the notable generals of World War II, from Patton to Montgomery to Eisenhower. Then he had autographed photos of United States presidents, from 1945 to 1970. And he had photo albums. He was General MacArthur's personal photographer during World War II. The photos of the surrender signatures on the deck of the Missouri, he was there. He began as a newspaper photographer in his teens and took some of the most iconic photos of the attack on Pearl Harbor. He has since passed away. but his name was Frank Cordero, Jr. Ma Bu Hi, old friend. And well, friends, that was all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, let me know with a thumbs up so that YouTube can share these stories with more people. Remember to hit the bell icon to be the first to know when we upload a new video. See you next time.